On December 7, 1941, a calm Sunday morning in Hawaii was suddenly shattered. At Pearl Harbor, the main U.S. naval base in the Pacific, everything seemed normal until just before 8 a.m., when hundreds of Japanese planes launched a surprise attack. They bombed ships, airfields, and military targets with devastating precision. In a matter of hours, the U.S. Pacific Fleet was badly damaged. The USS Arizona exploded, killing over 1,000 men on board. By the end of the attack, over 2,400 Americans were dead, and many more were wounded. The country was in shock. The next day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt called it a date which will live in infamy and asked Congress to declare war on Japan. That day, America officially entered World War II. This was no longer just about revenge. It was the beginning of a massive, challenging war between the US and Japan. To understand why Japan attacked, we have to look at what led up to it. Japan is a small island nation with very few natural resources. In the early 1900s, its leaders believed the only way to grow was to expand into other parts of Asia. They invaded Manchuria in the 1930s, then China, and started building an empire across the Pacific. The US didn't like this. It had strong economic interests in Asia and didn't want to see Japan take over. So America responded with sanctions, cutting off supplies like oil, steel, and rubber things Japan needed to keep its military running. Japan saw this as a serious threat. Its leaders believed they had to act fast before the US became too strong to stop. They hoped that by hitting hard and fast, they could force America to back down. They underestimated how determined the US would become. The attack on Pearl Harbor caused huge damage, but it didn't achieve what Japan had hoped. Their main goal was to destroy America's aircraft carriers, but those weren't even in the harbor that day. Japan also didn't hit fuel storage or repair docks, which meant the US could recover faster than expected. Instead of scaring America into peace, the attack had the opposite effect. It united the country. People rushed to enlist factories, shifted to producing tanks, planes, and ships, and the entire nation prepared for war. Japan thought the US would give up. Instead, they woke a giant that was more powerful and determined than ever. After Pearl Harbor, Japan quickly took over huge areas in the Pacific. They captured the Philippines, Guam, and parts of Southeast Asia. In the Philippines, American and Filipino troops fought hard but were eventually forced to surrender. This led to the Bataan Death March, where thousands of prisoners were forced to walk over 60 miles without food or water. Many died from exhaustion or were killed along the way. These stories shocked the American public and made them even more determined to fight. But Japan had stretched its forces thin. Holding on to all that territory would soon become difficult. The Battle of Midway in June 1942 changed everything. American codebreakers had figured out Japan's next move and were ready. As the Japanese Navy approached Midway Atoll, US forces launched a surprise counterattack. In a matter of hours, Japan lost 4 aircraft carriers and many of its best pilots. This was a huge loss they couldn't easily recover from. Meanwhile, the US was just getting started. American factories were producing more planes and ships than Japan could destroy. After Midway, Japan was no longer on the offensive. The US now had the upper hand and wasn't going to let go. With momentum on their side, the US began a strategy called island hopping, capturing key islands, one by one, while avoiding heavily defended ones. The first big test was at Guadalcanal, where US forces fought for 6 long months in tough jungle conditions. They won, but at a high cost. After that came battles at Tarawa, Saipan, and Tinian, each more brutal than the last. At Iwo Jima, 70,000 US Marines faced 21,000 Japanese defenders. Nearly all the Japanese soldiers died, and over 6,000 Americans were killed. These battles showed just how far Japan would go to avoid surrender and how determined the US was to win. As the US moved closer to Japan, things grew more desperate. Japan began using kamikaze pilotsmen, who deliberately crashed their planes into US ships. These suicide attacks caused serious damage and killed many. But they didn't stop the American advance. In the Battle of Okinawa, the last major battle of the war, US forces landed with over 180,000 troops. Japan defended with everything it had, including civilians and even children. The fighting was intense. Around 14,000 Americans died, and tens of thousands were wounded. The number of Japanese and civilian deaths was even higher. Okinawa gave the US a glimpse of what an invasion of mainland Japan might look like, and it wasn't encouraging. Asterisk while fighting continued. A top-secret project in the US was about to change everything. The Manhattan Project had developed the world's first atomic bomb. With Japan refusing to surrender and fears of massive casualties in a full-scale invasion, President Truman made a difficult choice. On August 6, 1945, the US dropped an atomic bomb on Hiroshima. The city was nearly destroyed, and thousands were killed instantly. 3 days later, a second bomb hit Nagasaki. The destruction was beyond anything the world had ever seen. Faced with no other choice, Japan finally agreed to surrender. Asterisk. On August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito told the Japanese people that the war was over. It was the first time they had ever heard his voice. On September 2nd, Japan officially surrendered. Aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay, World War II had ended. The cost was unimaginable. Japan was devastated, and millions had died. For America, the war brought global power and influence, but also deep scars. Japan, once a proud empire, now faced a complete transformation. Its emperor lost divine status. Democracy was introduced, and American forces helped rebuild the country. Trials were held for war crimes, and Japan began a long journey toward peace. Asterisk. In the years that followed, Japan and the US went from bitter enemies to close allies. With American support and its own innovation, Japan rebuilt quickly and became a major economic power. The two countries formed a strong partnership in trade, technology, and diplomacy. But the war left lasting memories. Hiroshima and Nagasaki remain powerful reminders of what war can do. The conflict between Japan and the US was more than just battles. It was about values, beliefs, and the future of the world. It showed the worst and best of humanity, and its impact is still felt today. In just a few years, the war changed everything, and its lessons are still important in the world we live in now.